Cool. All right. Hi, everybody. I hope you're all enjoying GDC so far. And good morning, and thank you for coming to my talk today. So my name is John Abercrombie, and for the last 6 years, I've been the lead programmer of the gameplay team at Irrational Games. Previously, I worked as the AI lead for both SWAT 4 and BioShock 1. So although I was previously working on AI for 2 awesome projects for BioShock Infinite, I wanted a different challenge than working on AI, and I worked as lead programmer for most of the project. However, in my last 6 years of development experience, I haven't had something as challenging or as satisfying as the work I did in the last 8 months of the project on BioShock Infinite. And it went beyond programming and beyond just implementation. It was during this time that I was charged with helping to bring Elizabeth, the companion character of BioShock Infinite, to life. So, bringing to life. What does that mean, really? Well, it means to make something live. Okay, but what does that mean in terms of making a video game? From my experience, it's about making the player believe that a character is living in the world of your game. And in the process, they lose themselves in the fascination of the character. The Walt Disney Company has been presenting the illusion of life to audiences for much longer than I've been alive. Characters like Cinderella or Peter Pan mean more to us than images from colored celluloid projected onto the vinyl screen. Not only because of the fantasy of the prince rescuing us from our evil stepmothers, not only because we want to fly, fight pirates, or never grow up, but because we believe in and yearn to be part of their magical world and are entertained by the prospect of doing so. Video games fulfill that promise. As a player, you are no longer restricted to being an observer. You are given the chance to join the fantasy world. You can be a participant. You are an actor that is part of the world and can explore, interact, and hopefully feel something that you haven't experienced anywhere else. As a developer, we want to deliver that experience in the best way that we can. And as AI developers, we have the unique opportunity to give life to the world that might otherwise just be a museum. Therefore, the characters that inhabit the worlds we create must express themselves in a believable and entertaining fashion to allow the player to take part in that fantasy. So one of the pillars we've had at Irrational Games is for our employees to be player-facing, where we strive to perceive our work from the point of view of the gamer. It is our belief that the gamer only understands the work through the pixels on the screen and the sounds of their speakers. Nothing more. At Irrational, this is how we think about our presentation. For every visual we put on the screen or audio through the speakers, everything must be shown or heard or it didn't happen. I will be using the term player-facing for the rest of the talk as it has guided our implementation decisions for the games that we've made. As a developer, I can tell you that it is a very difficult proposition to make entertaining, believable, and challenging AI. With the added task of being player-facing, we must focus on our ability to show the player all of these things. We can't tell them what the AI is thinking or how it's really supposed to animate. This is a real challenge for us. But thankfully, we have a lot of entertainment mediums to look to when creating these characters. One medium in particular that I have looked to time and time again is the theater. Theater contains many aspects of the presentation of game AI, including but not limited to exaggerated gestures, exclamations, blocking, and improvisation. For the rest of the talk, I will discuss and give examples of how we successfully used player-facing techniques from theater and other performance mediums for the companion character of Elizabeth in BioShock Infinite. I will also present a few cases where we failed to use good player-facing performance techniques as well. So we struggled in a number of ways in the creation of Elizabeth. And one of the most difficult tasks we faced was how the player would navigate the world with Elizabeth in non-combat situations. Many games have scripted companion characters to move from point to point using scripting. And when the player reaches their location, they would move to the next point. Given our desire to have a dynamic character behaved naturally in a semi-open world, this would have caused an explosion of content for the level scripters that would in all likelihood result in an impossible task that would be unmaintainable as well. Some games will have the AI follow the player. This is someone who we felt should be on screen as much as possible, navigating along with the player and conversing with them to progress the story and to react to the world of Columbia. Therefore, we felt that this would not be the right choice for a character that was supposedly a partner of the player. But we did try having Elizabeth follow the player. This was fairly disastrous for us. Following a scripted sequence, we had her walk away from the player in scripted mode. In at least one instance, uninitiated player would try to follow her while she was following the player, and the comedy of errors would begin. In addition, because she was following, she was also off-screen. And if the player wanted to have any meaningful interaction with her, it would involve stopping and turning around to look at her. So in this video, we're going to start from a scripted sequence where the player has just rescued Elizabeth from her tower where she has been locked up her entire life. She is enjoying her freedom and dancing on a dock when the player catches up to her. After the end of the scripted sequence, she'll start to follow the player. And there's a scripted bit to get her to talk to a cotton candy vendor. You'll notice to see her at all, you have to turn around, especially when she is talking to you. And so there's some debug text in this video. Again, it's from a pre-alpha version of the video, of the game, so just try to ignore it.
Elizabeth.
Hello. Oh, this is wonderful. Oh, come dance with me, Mr. DeWitt.
I don't dance. Come on, let's go.
Why? What could be better than this?
Well, how about Paris?
Paris? I don't understand. How could we get there?
That's where that airship's going, but if you want to stay and dance, we can...
No, let's go. Come on, let's go. Come on, let's go right now.
So here the scripted sequence ends. And now she's following us.
Why did you run off?
It's really easy to lose her, obviously.
You miss, treat yourself to something special. Cotton candy. Get it right here. There you go, little miss. Cotton candy here. It's your cotton candy.
Duke cleans his father's rifle every Sunday without being asked.
Get your cotton
This is
candy.
amazing.
Mice every afternoon.
How have I never tried
The old
this?
man's rifle back dirty.
I can't believe how much
That's what the Vox Populi do. Stir up the patties in the Negro.
A dimwit.
Versus labor unrest, and they're coming for you.
So obviously a little racism for you this morning. So following the player was definitely not going to work. Our next idea was to try and predict a location for Elizabeth ahead of the player based on the player's movement. Unfortunately, this was extremely difficult to make look good for a number of reasons. Having her attempt to match the prediction location was difficult, and once she was docked in, the prediction location she would travel unnaturally as the player moved laterally due to the speed required to do so. And this early video demonstrates our attempt to predict the location ahead of the player for Elizabeth's movement. She attempts to dock with the projected location, but it's problematic because it's reactive and it's not a planned movement. So you'll see her walk into geometry, and also you'll see some foot sliding as well, and I'll try to point it out. So here's some debug information for the prediction. You can see the blue shape is where she's trying to get to, and the red is the predicted where we think the player is going, basically. So she's going to dock, and she walks right into geometry. Turn off the debug information here. She's going to dock on the right side, and she walks into the surfboard. Now you're walking together, but you can see some foot sliding there, and again right up here. So just reacting to the player's movements wasn't going to work either. So much like a stage actor would not just walk around on stage, but would plan it ahead of time, we needed some blocking rules. Blocking is a term used in theater or other performances held on stage for determining movement and location for actors. Typically, actors are told by the director during rehearsal where to move, either for dramatic effect, lighting cues, or to make sure the audience can see them. Blocking is different depending on the type of stage, whether it's the common proscenium stage where the audience sits on one end and the actors perform on the other, a thrust stage where the audience generally sits on three sides, or a theater in the round where the audience sits on all sides. Generally for games, I like to think of the stage as a theater in a round where the player could be anywhere to view the game, but you could also think of it as a performance art piece, something like Sleep No More, where the audience is actually on stage with the actors. Our blocking method for Elizabeth ended up what we internally called goal side. For those of you that don't know, goal side comes from a soccer defender's behavior when guarding an offensive player. You always want to stay between the player and the goal. Given that there are a number of fixed locations where the player needs to go to progress the story of BioShock Infinite, we created a navigation path from the player to the most appropriate goal. I've heard the term golden path right here at GDC last year used to describe this technique. The goal side behavior comes from the fact that Elizabeth will attempt to stay just ahead of the player along this path. So in this video, we'll start at the same scripted sequence we started at before with Elizabeth on the dock. After the scripted sequence ends, she'll lead the player towards the next goal, which is a turnstile at the end of the beach, and I'll point it out. Along the way, she'll stop and she'll try to interact with a few things, and at that point, we'll blast past her to get to the turnstile first.
Come on, let's go. Come on, let's go right now. I'm out. It's hard to believe, but it's true, isn't it? Oh, can you smell that? I've never smelled anything like that before, have you?
Beaches I know don't smell much like that.
So I'm going to run to the turnstile up there. You can imagine how many times we tested that, just doing that.
It almost looks like a ocean. It's just a set of elaborate pumps and rain catchers.
So I've turned on the debugging information for the goal side, and you can see the path from the player to the turnstile. And you can see as I move around here, it moves around with me.
I can tell my wife is scared. But I don't have her. Comstock will take care of the box. If he says he has a...
Do you know this artificial beach was built in only 6 months?
And how do you know that?
From one of the books I threw at you. They also served passing well for reading.
So there's also the player's behavior to consider. Players can behave erratically, and I'm not talking about degenerate behavior like trying to shoot your partner or push them off a cliff. Whether the player knows it or not, leaping over a railing to take a shortcut when an AI is trying to navigate with the player is a difficult problem to have. We needed a way to be able to have our companion character improvise based on the player's movements. As you might have seen in that previous video, we are still using player position prediction to determine how close we should try to be to the player. We did this because we wanted Elizabeth to maintain her distance while the player is moving. Our number one rule for this behavior was to have Elizabeth stay goal side, but having her move too far ahead of the player was impersonal, and having her be too close would allow the player to blast past her, invalidating the goal side rule. Player position prediction also helps us to avoid having Elizabeth make minor positioning adjustments when the player makes small movements. Players are notoriously squirrely when playing a first-person shooter, and it's very noticeable if your companion AI is also making small micro-adjustments to their positioning when you're really not moving that far. However, at this point, there's still a number of ways for the player to get out ahead from Elizabeth. The player can take a longer divergent path from the shortest one, take a shortcut over a railing, and not all animation movement transitions can instantaneously get the companion character moving ahead of the player quickly. And as a result, it's possible that the player could get ahead of Elizabeth. So as a fallback, when she gets behind, we do teleport her if it would not be noticeable to the player. And in general, this works very well and doesn't break immersion. So here's an example video that makes it very apparent about what we're doing. Note that Elizabeth cannot really use the freight hooks that I'm going to use, so it really makes this easy to show off. So I'm going to turn around and jump onto a freight hook up here.
I'll wait down here.
And there she is. And I'm going to do it again, go back. And I'm going to book it to our goal, which is this lever up here. And she's right there with me, right in her spot. So the goal side behavior was the foundation of our non-combat behaviors. Now at this point, we had the implementation for Elizabeth's non-combat movement using both planning, or blocking, and reactive improvised behaviors. But we wanted Elizabeth to not just be a partner and a guide through Columbia. We wanted her to explore and discover the world outside of her tower. We wanted our companion character to interact with the world in a believable fashion and at the appropriate time. We had her navigating with a player, but that wasn't enough to make her seem like a part of the fantastical world of Columbia. As much as possible, we wanted the performance of Elizabeth to transition from being a naive girl who had been trapped in her tower since birth into an empowered woman who was ready to face the reality of her situation. To make her seem to be less of a robot, we wanted her to act like a human and look at objects in the world that a human in her situation might look at. So that begs the question, what do humans look at, and why do they look at those objects in particular? So we all know that attention is a limited resource. Our senses generally can only concentrate at one thing at a time. Otherwise, right now, we'd all be paralyzed with the amount of input that our sensory receptors are receiving. Since we have so much sensory input bombarding us incessantly, our attention must be selective. As humans, we look at the things that are relevant to us, and our mind tells us what we should be focusing on. So my hope is that right now, you are focusing on me or my slides, but you may be using your phone or looking at your GDC schedule because right now you find that more interesting. So in general, we find the most interesting subject to focus on and allow our brain to make decisions about whether we should change focus or to something else. And as advanced as we are still very primal in some ways, and we look out for danger to keep us alive. So to have Elizabeth perform in the world of BioShock Infinite, much like a human, required us to think about the things Elizabeth should be looking at. We approached this challenge by breaking it up into two separate but connected parts. As with all games, you end up making the software for the game as well as the software you use to make the game. So for our character's look-at system, we had a number of ways for creating and placing the look-at markers, and while in-game, a systemic implementation did the decision-making based on the content. While the game was running, Elizabeth and other AI characters as well would make a decision about what she should be looking at. When a character is looking at a far-off object, it's difficult for the viewer to understand what they are looking at. To combat this, we had a proximity query system for determining objects that were a certain distance from the character, and we used this to figure out which objects we could consider when trying to look at something. Each look-at marker could have a bounds as well, so we wouldn't consider looking at the object if we weren't within the bounds. We also took into account whether Elizabeth would be able to look at the object based on her current orientation and velocity. Obviously, we don't want her to attempt to look at something that would be on a natural movement or would only be visible to her briefly. To keep Elizabeth from staring too long at an object and to keep her from repeatedly picking the same object to look at, we had a few different types of timers and cooldowns to keep her interested in a variety of objects in the world. When humans talk to each other, we look at each other, but not for too long. Generally, we don't we don't lock gaze with each other and hold it as that is unnatural and frankly uncomfortable. We did fight a bit with the implementation because we wanted Elizabeth to look at the player, especially while the player is talking. In the end, we found a good balance between having Elizabeth look at you by tuning the previously mentioned timers and cooldowns to avoid having it feel unnatural. And for placement of markers, we had both systemic generation of the look at markers mixed in with some hand-placed markers for her to pay particular attention to certain objects. So for a mesh that was used in game, you could automatically generate one or many look at markers at specific points on the objects, and as well as the proximity, and Elizabeth would be able to look at that. Once you place that mesh, you could it would automatically inherit the values that you'd already set, so you could place the mesh multiple times and not have to do the setup again. We also had Elizabeth automatically looking at other characters, including the player, and she would give priority to nearby characters that were speaking. You could also hand place the markers in the editor, and our designers did use this extensively. Character behaviors could also recommend targets to look at as well. Most of the generated markers and all of the hand-placed markers could be enabled or disabled using our scripting system as well. So here's an early pre-alpha example of Elizabeth walking on the beach with some cotton candy while looking at different interesting objects. She looks over systemically at points in the world and then at a group who are speaking to one another. And she also makes an attempt to look at the player as well. You can see the orange line there is what she's actually looking at.
Are you a duke? Or an dimwit? When Duke sees a suspicious-looking character, he reports him to his authorities straight away. When Dimwit sees a suspicious-looking character, he ignores him and focuses on his new tutor.
Sorry, I just want to play that video again because if you notice up in the corner of the debug text, we had a mode called WTF Liz, which was our debugging information for her. So I highly recommend something like that for doing a character as complicated as Elizabeth. So here's an example of hand-placed markers. On the left, you can see a painting of Lady Comstock as it appeared in the game, and on the right, as it appeared in the editor. Obviously, this painting was really important, and we wanted Elizabeth to pay attention to it when she was near it. We were basically telling her, I don't care what else is going on right now, stare at this painting. In retrospect, our weighting system wasn't robust enough to handle the desire of staring at one thing, and we shouldn't have had to place all these points to get the effect that we wanted. However, it wasn't the most important thing for us to fix, and overall the system worked very well as it provided a balanced way to approach having characters look at interesting objects naturally. It certainly provided a human-like behavior that improved the performance of Elizabeth and other characters as well. So we had the ability for Elizabeth to do soft behaviors that would help carry her performance of interacting with the world, but we wanted more tactile behaviors. She should interact with objects in the world. And if we were going to have her interact, we wanted to make sure that the player noticed that she was doing it. Internally, we had a technology we called Smart Terrain that would allow animators to create animations where a character could interact with an inanimate object. When the object was placed in a level, it automatically would be considered for usage by Elizabeth without having to do any manual setup. However, the designers could also place Smart Terrain manually, like if they wanted Elizabeth to ponder a particular object in the world from a particular vantage point. So to give an example of Smart Terrain, in this video, I'm using a debug command we had for Elizabeth where I can just point at the docking points for the Smart Terrain, and she'll just move to and use it. So right now she's using Smart Terrain leaning up against the column. I'm going to point at this Smart Terrain over here. She's going to look in the window. I'm going to point at that Smart Terrain over by the bench. And she'll sit down. So we couldn't have her invalidating the goal side behavior and running off to do an interaction that would take her far off the path to the next goal. Again, we needed good blocking. To achieve this, we added additional functionality to only choose smart terrain that was near the golden path, but was close enough to the path that she could remain goal side. If you can kind of imagine a cone emanating from the player projected onto the golden path, that's kind of what it ended up looking like. So the further away from the player along the golden path you were, the further she could move away from it. And it worked very well, and it didn't invalidate the goal side behavior, so she would still be able to get into position pretty quickly. Following this success, we added functionality for Elizabeth to call out particular items that would be really useful for the player to pick up. So in this video, you'll see the golden path as well as Elizabeth. You'll see the golden path as well as Elizabeth moving to different points of smart terrain throughout the area. So there's her connection to the golden path, and she's still not far enough when she's at this bottom of the stairwell to invalidate goal side. So she's using different pieces of smart terrain here, and it's just pondering the moving statue in the middle. I'm not even sure what that is, really. I'm going to run over here, and the golden path follows me along, and she'll move over and start doing smart terrain in this area.
I found a lockpick.
She'll point out items as well. Here she is doing some more smart terrain, investigating that vending machine. And we're going to walk back towards our goal together. So finally, once this all came together, it still wasn't enough. We really wanted the player to notice that Elizabeth was interacting with the world. So we wanted to exaggerate Elizabeth's behavior to get the player to notice her, but without making her seem too ridiculous. To do this, we added utterances like a sigh or to try and get the player's attention. And we would actually sometimes teleport her around too, just to get her to smart terrain quickly. So in this video, you won't see Elizabeth right away. She'll be off doing some smart terrain, but we want the player to notice it. And in this case, she'll sigh. And if you look towards it or see what she's doing, you'll see in a second. She's taking a break. Come on, Liz, let's go. Come on. Okay. So the goal side and the added functionality of using smart terrain and pointing out items gave real life to Elizabeth and her non-combat behaviors. But for a good portion of the game, the player is in combat. How could we make Elizabeth feel like a lifelike partner for the player in combat? So for the combat behavior, initially we wanted her to be on screen during combat, taking cover. Our idea here was to show her as being a partner in the combat and show her taking cover and pointing out threats. And we always wanted to try and keep her on screen. Our initial trials for this resulted in her either being too close to the player or too far into the field of battle, which would look like she wasn't trying to make the best choices for being in harm's way. So in this early video, a really early video from development, you'll see Elizabeth attempt to take cover on screen. And while in certain instances it does work well, a lot of the time she spends running through the player's field of fire to get to cover on screen. And this is extremely frustrating for a player, and it doesn't make Elizabeth seem like a character who's supposed to be able to take care of herself. So it looks really great right there. But here she comes on the skyline. And she's running the cover that's on screen right there, but unfortunately that's right across my field of fire, and it just doesn't look good. And it's extremely frustrating. So from my experience working on and playing first-person shooters, I know that during combat, the details tend to fall away. The player notices less because they're concentrating on the combat and staying alive. And as a result, you can get away with a bit more trickery because the player has less to think about. And given that the player may not notice her, we realize that the player doesn't notice that Elizabeth isn't on screen. And since she doesn't really matter to players during combat, as long as she stays out of the way, we can put her anywhere we want away from the enemies. And this works especially well if she's able to be off screen and out of the way. So that's what we did. But in the worst case scenario, if she did find herself on screen and the player, through their viewpoint, keeps her on screen, and she wanted to be closer to the player to take cover, we would have her first path to the player. To have her stay out of your line of fire and behave like she was trying to avoid being in a firefight, we would create a number of conic sections with a player's position as the pivot. If an enemy was found to be in one of these sections, we would add cost to the navigation mesh vertices. And in general, it ends up that she does a really good job to stay out of the line of fire. Occasionally, she would end up running through the line of fire due to navigation constraints. And we would have her throw up her arms and cover her head while moving. So she performed like she was in the middle of a firefight. So we had her move toward the player rather than moving to cover directly, because the player could move while she was navigating, invalidating cover she might have chosen from far away. When she got within a certain proximity of the player, then she would choose cover. Since we were running a cover finding service based around the player's location, in the background, cover was immediately available, and she could move directly to it. So with Elizabeth out of the way of the player, we'd lost the sense of making her feel involved like a partner would during combat. We came up with the idea of item tossing to help the player defeat the enemies. We wanted to feel something like out of a movie, and it needed to feel like you were getting the exact thing you needed at the right time. I shiver to say it because we wanted it to feel, quote, clutch, but that became such a bad buzzword we tried to avoid saying clutch. But we wanted to feel something like this.
Yes. No, that's rubbish.
Feel free to step in any time.
You all right?
I didn't want to cramp your style.
So when I started with the Elizabeth team, the current design of the item toss in combat required her to create the item off screen and for you to look at her when you wanted to receive it, and you actually had to get kind of close to her. So this video gives you kind of an idea of how it worked. It's from the middle of combat, and when the off-screen Elizabeth offers the item, you have to walk up close to her and face her while she still has the item.
Found ammo! Heads up!
Nice.
Obviously, the audio wasn't all there yet. So this implementation was less than ideal, and as a result, it was streamlined to allow it to occur more. So she could create the item regardless of whether you could see her, and you no longer needed to look at her to make the toss occur. And we also greatly increased the distance that she could toss the item to players that were further away. For a while, we had it really long, so she was like a football quarterback, but we dialed it in a little bit. So that worked well, but the player could still run away from the ballistic trajectory of the item toss easily during combat. And it would become frustrating for the player when the prompt disappears because they couldn't receive the item anymore. So we wanted her to toss the player the item, but only if the player didn't run behind geometry and obstruct the toss. And the player couldn't keep track of that. And it wasn't important that we were realistic. We wanted to make it feel good for the player. So we had to have Elizabeth improvise, again, based off the player's actions. As I mentioned before, the details fall away in combat. And generally, Elizabeth is out of the way, and therefore she is not a player-facing element. This does give us the options for trickery to make the player-facing element of the gameplay feel better. And since the player generally doesn't know where Elizabeth is, once she offers an item, we run a background service that finds a point where she could throw the item. If at any point we determine that her current location is not usable for throwing an item to the player, we teleport her to a nearby location off screen and begin the throw. As a result of adding this service, we could make it possible for Elizabeth to throw an item from nearly anywhere around the player. There's a very remote chance that you could ever find a spot in the game where she can't throw something from. So now we would be able to keep up the item tossing prompt for as long as we wanted, and the player no longer had to worry about obstructions from blocking the item toss. As a result of the item toss working well, Elizabeth felt more like a partner in combat, someone you could count on to help you out when you needed it. Unfortunately, we couldn't be giving the player items all the time during combat. Otherwise, the player would have no incentive to search for items on their own. So the item toss behavior works so well to reinforce Elizabeth as a partner, so we looked for other ways to help the player out. During combat, we also used exaggerating exclamations for Elizabeth to help the player notice enemy challenges in case they weren't aware of it. So here is an early version of this behavior where Elizabeth would call out a marksman or a sniper on a balcony across from the player.
Marksman!
So I'm just going to play that one more time. I just want to point out at the beginning of the video, she's also pointing out the characters that are coming at you. She's pointing right here.
Marksman!
Okay. So the early version let the player know that the threat existed, but the uninitiated player didn't necessarily know where the threat was. We found that the comment up there, marksman, or on the left, didn't really mean much to a player that didn't know the geometry well or was constantly rotating and moving around. As a result, we found ourselves needing to provide an icon spotlight on the challenge, much like a dramatic entrance would require a spotlight in the theater. As I've previously discussed, as a player, it's hard to track that everything is going on in the world when you're trying to stay alive. So in this next video, we have removed the functionality for Elizabeth to give positional data and instead depend on the spotlight icon to give the player positional information. And this is from the final game, and you'll see her highlight multiple enemies as the battle progresses.
There's a sniper, Booker!
We've had enough of you!
Booker, sniper!
So this implementation worked very well, and although it was a bit over the top in terms of putting an icon on the screen, and after having exhausted all the methods that we could think of to not do that, it was the right choice in the end. Helping the player by providing useful information made Elizabeth feel like a partner in combat, and as a result, I think it made her feel more believable as an in-world character. While these techniques were extremely powerful for allowing us to create a dynamic living companion character in BioShock Infinite, and as a result, I believe we've made the player feel more like a participant in the world and less like an observer. But I believe it's just the tip of the iceberg to creating great companion character AI, and I think there's a lot more to explore in the future. So in conclusion today, I would like to encourage you to think more about your techniques to be player-facing with your game AI. It is more important for a game AI to be entertaining than it is to have a clever algorithm. As AI programmers, we tend to search for the most robust and possibly complex solution rather than looking for the elegant and hopefully simple solution that the player will understand. Rather than focusing on the algorithm, you should focus on the player experience first and let the implementation support that functionality. While this may typically be the job of an AI designer, everyone on the team, including the programmers, must be taking this into account. An AI designer can provide the framework for game AI. It is everyday functionality decisions the AI programmers make that determine the composition of character behaviors. So we must all think about theater and other performance techniques we can use to make our AI believable and fun. Exaggerations, blocking, improvisation, and even spotlights can be useful tools when presenting your game AI. It is also important to realize that in professional game development, we are not trying to create the perfect or necessarily real AI. We are trying to create entertainment. The use of simplistic solutions, clever tricks, or hacks should not be discouraged because the player does not know what techniques we have implemented. They only know what they see on the screen and what they hear through the speakers. So thank you, everyone. Okay, cool. I'm not done yet. Yeah. Go ahead. Okay, so if you are so inclined, during the main conference, our animation director, Sean Robertson, will be giving a presentation on Thursday that will discuss their animation approach to creating Elizabeth. And I cribbed one of his videos, so I got to thank him. So again, my name is John Abercrombie, and if you'd like to contact me via Twitter, I'd love to hear from you, in 140 characters or less, of course. And since Irrational is winding down and eventually closing, I just wanted to take this opportunity to recognize all of the people that worked on the dedicated Liz squad that I led in the last 8 months of the project. These designers, animators, programmers, writers, and producers all helped make something great, and I'm lucky to have worked with them. And there's a lot of other people as well who weren't part of our Liz squad that helped make it as well. And at this point, I'm happy to take your questions. I'm sure. Yeah, I have plenty of time to take questions, so please line up at the microphones, and thank you all again for coming today. Hey, Alex.
Thanks, that was an awesome talk.
Thank you.
Could you share what you guys did for the 5 years before you worked on this? You said this was 8 months of work towards the end of the project. Did you try some of the things before that you had to throw out?
The things we tried were from that 4.5 years that we worked on Infinite. I mean, we started off early on with a new version of the engine for us internally, and we had to make a ton of modifications just to get our AI and animation rolling to the point where we could start prototyping things for Elizabeth. And some of the videos I've shown today are part of those prototypes during earlier in the process.
So when did Liz come in, like in the past couple of years or so?
I mean, by the time I joined the project, I was standing on the shoulders of giants because there had been work done previously. I mean, my goal in a lot of ways was just to make things organized and figure out what was important for the character. And basically, it wasn't in a great shape at that point. And so we did have a lot of technology, like if the look-at technology that I discussed was pretty much there when I joined the project, but the goal side behavior was not, for example. So that was something that definitely came on as part of that work. And Tim Austin over there is the guy who actually came up with the idea for goal side, so kudos to him.
Yeah, thanks.
Yep. Okay, to left.
Yeah. Hey there, big fan. So I was wondering, when you guys were doing the DLC, like Burial at Sea, did you have any more time, or like did you think of it as an opportunity to go back and maybe change some of the behavior of Elizabeth, or like some of the companion side logic there?
No, we didn't want to shake the jello. With the shake the jello, that's the term we use to not mess up the content or the code right before we're about to ship something. And then we didn't want to mess up the original game as well. We didn't want to change the experience too much. I think for Burial at Sea Part 1, we did do some modifications to her behaviors. Obviously, it was a different combat situation where there was a little bit more stealth. So we added behaviors for her to animate a little bit more naturally in situations where you were about to get into combat. And that was honestly something we had talked about during the main game, but we didn't end up having time for. There's a few things like that where we wanted to have her, sort of like realize that you're about to get into combat, but not necessarily go full in combat mode. But we never had the real. That would have required some significant balancing, especially with all the different types of geometry and enemy placement that we were dealing with, so we never actually got around to that for the main game. But for Burial at Sea Part 1, I believe we did do that work, and it ended up being like she was actually, being ready for the combat. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hi there. Thanks
Hi.
again for talking to us today. It was
Yeah.
really informative. I wanted to talk about the weighting system. And in that image of Lady Comstock that you showed in your presentation, there are tons and tons of different custom lookup points. I was wondering what would have changed if the weighting system was implemented, and the reason why the weighting system was not implemented.
That way, yeah. So that, honestly, like I said, I came on in the last 8 months or so of the project, so I'm not really familiar with the internal workings of that particular system. It just wasn't, given the fact that it worked, the work was good enough for where we were. I didn't actually look into how we would change that. But honestly, just looking at it, or from any armchair AI programmer or designer will tell you, that's kind of a pain in the neck way to work, just copy and pasting things and moving them around. So I guess in retrospect, what I would have done there is just have a weighting system and cooldown system that would allow for her to stare at something without, or stare at offsets of the thing as she looked around the painting, let's say if she was closer or something like that, without having to create, it had to be like 50 or so icons up there for all those different lookup points. Does that answer your question, or is there something more to it?
Yeah, well, actually, I thought that those many lookout points might have actually been pretty useful because, the human eye and the gaze of one person goes from one eye to the next eye to the center of the face to the dress and all of this other kind of stuff. So
yeah.
I guess saying explicitly the places where you would actually look, I think might have actually, you're right, benefited as opposed to...
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could, I would say that I would created a bounds, basically, like just a box saying, this is where you want to be looking inside of this box instead of creating discrete points. And that's how I would have done that.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, left?
Oh, okay. I'm just curious about, when you talked about, I guess you talked about removing Elizabeth from combat at some point. You're just like...
Yeah.
Player doesn't notice, and you said she looked bad when she would like run across stuff. I'm curious, I assume you used like some sort of goal side thing when you were like trying to get her on screen. And I don't know.
No, actually, okay. Goal side was only during the non-combat behaviors.
Oh, okay.
For the cover, we wanted to keep her within a certain, distance of the player. So it was generally based about the player, like just like a radius.
So my question then is, in the video you showed her, it looked bad when she like ran across.
Yeah.
Right, and she like ran across the player. But I wonder I'm curious if you tried anything that was just like a simple thing where, hey, if the player's in combat, like don't cross in front of him, like try to stay on one side or the other.
Yeah, I mean,
did that work or not work?
Yeah, I mean, that was what I was talking about when I brought up the conic sections. So when she was far enough away and she wanted to move closer to stay within the radius of the player, basically we created a bunch of conic sections. I think there was probably about 8 or so about the player. And if there were any enemies in that conic section, we would take the nav mesh vertices that were within that section and basically add cost to them so that when she did navigate, she would try to avoid walking on those vertices. So it generally kept her out of harm's way. So if there was guys in front of you, she would stay to the sides, right? Or she might use the skyline or something to come over them. But there was occasional situations, if you were in a hallway or something like that, there was no way that we could get her to move about.
So it's just technically more expensive, but it's not allowed.
Yes, exactly. It's not blocked. I mean, in general, when you're doing with pathfinding like that, you have to be very careful when you're blocking vertices or nodes or anything like that along your path. It's often that you could, patch up the only way she can go or your character can go. So it'd be a problem.
So okay.
Fair.
Hi. So thanks for the great talk again. You mentioned that Elizabeth kind of reacts to the nearest speaking character in the world.
Yeah.
Did it go beyond that in any way? And how did you work with the audio team or the audio systems to kind of get an audibility of things in the world?
I think there was some priority given to players that were talking. If the player was talking, I'm not as familiar with the implementation for that. But I would say she would give priority if she had nothing else to do. It was more than likely that she'd be looking at nearby characters that were talking. And we had different types of characters. We had stationary characters that wouldn't move, and so they were kind of a different type. But she treated them all the same as far as being able to speak. So I would say in the absence of having anything else to look at, she'd probably look at that briefly, or at least it would hold her gaze for a little bit, but she wouldn't again, the whole timers and cooldowns thing would kick in, and she'd look at something else too.
Right, sure. Were there any other audible things in the world that she would look at, or was it just speaking characters?
I'm trying to. I don't know the answer to that. It certainly would have been an interesting thing to think about. But I mean, off the top of my head, I'd say no. I would say probably she just focused on speakers, like characters that could speak, versus an explode. Like, you know, you could take it a lot further. You could say, like, you know, and I mentioned this in terms of like humans being primal. Like when explosions go off, you know, you would look at the explosion, or you'd look at a way to get away. Stuff like that is certainly an interesting way to go for the future.
Cool. Thanks.
Yep. Middle.
Great presentation, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
I have two questions. One is, you know, you relied on a lot of like hints in the world.
Yeah.
And it seems like that kind of a system came online pretty late. What kind of control did you end up giving to the design team? And were there kind of like a pipeline problems to generate all these, you know, hints in the world? Because that's where like the time runs short. So did you happen to kind of like, you know, do something special to just kind of like, you know, analyze the world so they don't have to like place it by hand?
Well, we did have some auto-generated functionality, but we had at least three dedicated level designers focusing with Elizabeth. Like they were actually tasked with working specifically on Elizabeth. So I'm seeing one of them out there. Amanda. She's not looking, but she was our you know, sort of a lead level designer for Elizabeth. And there, you know, honestly, were we not in the situation we were, where we were, you know, trying to make Elizabeth be a world-class companion character, would not have ended up in having to do so much hand-placed work. We would have tried to do a lot more auto-generation, like that could be modified by hand-placed work. Unfortunately, we weren't in that spot, so we had to do a lot of hand generation and a lot of work with the other level designers who were actually tasked with working on the level to make sure we had a good handoff between what Elizabeth was trying to do versus what they were trying to do.
Okay. That's a good explanation. Another question quickly is that do you have any thoughts, or did you give any thoughts to like using this kind of a system that you guys wrote specifically for Elizabeth for more than one companion? And is this something that you guys can just kind of extend this system on, or do you feel that this is so crafted for one particular companion that adding one more will just break things apart?
Well, I don't think we really ever thought much about that, but honestly, I don't see any reason why you couldn't. I mean, our implementation obviously is for one Elizabeth, one companion character, but if you were starting from scratch, I don't think there's any reason that you couldn't start to think about multiple companion characters using the same sort of technology.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep.
Hey, great talk.
Thank you.
I mean, you guys definitely succeeded at creating a character that people remember and, you know, love. I think if that was your goal, you succeeded.
Thank you.
You know, Elizabeth has a marked, you know, change in atmosphere. Her performance changes from the kind of innocent girl to the confident woman. Was there any sort of AI element to that, or was that all content?
It was more content. I mean, it was certainly, like I mentioned before, we had 3 level designers who were working on her behavior and her hand-placed content and her auto-generated content as well in the levels, and it was up to them to you know, handle that change. And it was obviously up to the writers and narrative and the you know, scripted sequence guys who did that as well. But we wanted to support that in whatever way we could. But as far as the AI goes, I don't believe we had really any changes. It was just different content, which actually I think is probably a better way to go if you can do it that way, just because you don't have to change any code to make that happen. And so we had a whole, you know, I didn't get to talk about it today, but I know Sean will talk about it on Thursday? Yes, Thursday, about the emotion system that we had. So she goes from being very naive and looking at everything, and we supported that in our content, to being very empowered by the end and just sort of being resolute. And we had an emotion system as well that would control her you know, her face and her, you know, what her hands were doing during the animations and stuff to just support that.
Cool. And when did you know that Girls Just Want to Have Fun was the right song for this game?
I wish I knew the answer to that, but that was there for a long time. Honestly, I remember Ken saying, do we need that? Do we want to do that? And it was like, everybody's like, no, keep that. It's great. So
thanks so much.
Thank you. Okay, left.
Hi, thank you again. In regards to the combat, you mentioned that you took out the pointing and added the markers above the snipers instead.
Yeah.
Did you debate still leaving in that pointing and that emotion direction in the game and only?
I mean, I remember when I wasn't working on Elizabeth, I saw that and said that's not going to work. I mean, generally, the players move around a lot, especially in a first-person shooter, and they move unnaturally in general, as a player, I mean, in terms of a first-person shooter. And so relative positions and rotations don't really, there's so much a limited window of time where they actually make sense that it's really hard for it to actually be useful information to the player, especially during combat when you're moving around a lot. So in general, I guess with the sniper situation, and I showed the video, we did want to have at some point actually have contextual information up on the balcony, etc. But by the time we came to that realization that we wanted to do that, it was kind of too late for us to be able to make those kind of changes that late in the game. The pointing, I think, I'm not saying it won't work, and somebody may prove me wrong. But in our situation and the way we were trying it, I don't think it was going to work.
Do you think if BioShock had a slower pace in Infinite, I know the game was very fast-paced in combat, would it have been more practical?
Totally possible, yeah. I think if you had a realistic military shooter, I think it's definitely possible that you could do that sort of thing. Especially when as things get with perspective, as things get farther away, direction still makes sense as you're pointing. So if you have those long engagement distances, they might work as well.
Thank you.
Yep. Last one, middle.
How you doing?
Good.
I just have something very curious that happened to me while I was playing BioShock Infinite. A couple of times throughout the game, I felt that Elizabeth was kind of rude to me. I was just wondering if maybe anyone else, maybe you at Irrational Games, experienced that while you were testing that.
I did. I complained about it too.
Okay. No, just
sometimes I felt like she was just being and we changed things as a result of that too, where we could. I mean, obviously, late in the project, getting audio re-recorded, etc., is tough, especially when you've got got a whole story to tell that you have to record new audio for that, and you want to make sure that the player understands it. Sometimes. Early on she feels very naive. During mid-game, she does kind of seem a little bit standoffish a little bit. And then by the end, she's just you don't matter as much to me.
Well, it was what happened to me was that this happened right after, so at the end of the game, right after combat, I'm down to a sliver of life, low on ammo. And the very first thing that she does after combat ends is that she leans against the wall, crosses her arms, looks at me, and sighs.
Yeah.
And and I actually yelled at her.
Did you? I actually patched something in. We did a patch basically to try and keep her from doing those sort of smart terrain after combat ended because of that situation where it would be you just at the end of one of the levels you just killed Lady Comstock or whatever, and she's over well, whatever. And so we tried to do what we can to prevent that sort of performance, but we weren't entirely successful. It was something we realized really late in the game, obviously, since we patched it. But we tried our best to keep that from happening. But
well, it was a very interesting experience. I mean, it broke the immersion, but at the same time, I found myself immersed in the fact that I'm yelling at the camera.
Yeah, you actually had a reaction, which is what we were going for anyway. So,
all right, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.